margins.
Well, there was only this thing, and I'm like, okay, oh, there's there. Oh, he said he was sick, and then he also said he was waiting for a phone to come in. Oh, okay.
And here, but like the Julian party on Friday.
Yeah.
And
Oh, did you go?
yeah,
I heard about it. Ed told me.
then it's like it goes back and catches the Zoom.
Ed Chan told me yesterday.
Yeah.
Who told him that he should go there?
When you're a staff member, everything counts.
Oh, you can totally knock it back.
Yes! We're safe!
Now you need to count how many people actually trip over.
That would be awesome.
Last week we did the introduction to the course and the business plan. We had a look at that. This week we're going to have a look at product and service, and we'll get into strategy a little bit.
As you slept.
Analysis. So we're going to look at how to classify products and services. And so part 2 of this course is products and services and classification. We won't need the notebooks until, if you've got your desktop machine or your laptop machine, you won't need it until a bit later on in this lecture, and I'll let you know before you need to boot it up off sleep. Let's have a look at classifying these products and services. Industries are classified into a number of different divisions and a number of different groups, and indeed industries have evolved over the years. Where most industry comes from is extracting goods and services from doing it yourself to do it for me. Do we grow our own food anymore? Do we grow our own food? Where do we get most of what you do? Do you? But who does? Australia, absolutely, yeah, Australia, but we get it from Woolies and Coles, yeah? And that's given rise to an agricultural industry. Do we make our own clothes or furniture? Not always, but sometimes, yeah. My dad made our furniture in our house, and he also made our clothes too. It was pretty handy that way. But that's given rise to a manufacturing industry. Really sad thing is when I was taken by my mum and dad to these agricultural shows, it wasn't in Melbourne, it was called the Royal Show, not the Royal Easter Show. We used to go through halls of glass cases of needlework and cakes, absolute halls dedicated to cake decorating and making puddings and all those sort of things. Nowadays, when you go to the Royal Easter Show, would you go through a hall of needlework? Has anybody been through that agricultural hall? Would there be like hundreds of glass cases of needlework and knitting and those sort of things? It's half the side of a case now for needlework, half the side of a case for cake decorating. We've lost all those skills. They've been outsourced and transferred. Where have they gone to? To where? China. To China, yeah, or to our manufacturing base here in Australia. So we're losing all of these skills and they're migrating. So that's how industry evolves. It comes out of do it for yourself to do it for me. We don't build fires and cooking. That's given rise to our utilities industry. We don't build houses anymore. That's done by the construction industry. So more and more things are being extracted. What's being extracted now out of the home and going into industry? What sort of things? Education, a service, yeah? That'll actually be probably delivered online in a multimedia format straight into the home very soon. Yeah, education. All the services, ironing. Who does their own ironing still? All students, if you're really honest, you give it to your mum, don't you? Yeah. And then she outsources it to somebody else to go and do their ironing. So a lot of the services, when I was in Laminex, we made this stuff, this laminate. And where's laminate mainly used in the home? kitchen, yeah, in the kitchen carcasses, in the benches, the white laminate, and then the bench tops. We got a bit concerned there because when I was back in Laminex, there was a study in the US we were looking at, and they were starting to build houses without kitchens. Where are we outsourcing food to, at least in the US, where are they outsourcing food to? McDonald's and all the fast food restaurants, yeah? So that's a bit of a concern. But more and more we're outsourcing our services. So industry is really classified into 5 major sectors, 17 divisions in those 5 sectors, and currently in Australia there are 464 industries. Let's have a look at those, the way it's broken down. First, you do a broad classification into whether you've got a product or a service. Service is a big chunk of the number of industries. There's the 5 major divisions: the primary sector, secondary sector, which is the industrial, tertiary, which is distributing the product. So these 2 products coming from agriculture and industry or industrial have to be distributed by retailers and wholesalers. The quaternary or information, IT sector if you like, and then the quinary or personal sector. Up here, we're looking at tangible products. These things you can touch and feel. So that's your tangible products there, those 2. And then the tangible products have got to get to consumers through the tertiary or distribution sector. So they're the more intangible services down here. They're the intangible things. And more, I suppose, industry started by outsourcing most of the products, and more they're outsourcing the services now. So if you look at the primary sector, that's the agricultural age. It's given birth to agriculture, forestry and fishing. Also mining is put into that sector too, because it's from the earth. That's how we classify a primary sector. The secondary sector, which is the industrial sector, they take the stuff from the earth and they transform the raw materials. So there's your manufacturing, your utilities, electricity, gas, and also constructions in that industrial or secondary sector. The tertiary sector are the 3 ways of distributing products. A wholesaler will usually buy it from one of these sectors here, sell it to a retailer and then get it to the consumer. And transport and storage is also in that distribution sector. If you look at the information age, IT age, that was born in about the 1940s or 50s. Communications, finance, property and business, government and education. These are the creators of information here. And then finally your personal services sector and recreational sector, which is health and culture, media, personal services such as religion and those things, and accommodation. So let's have a look at how this has evolved. We'll go back to 250,000 BC for a quick history lesson, but a history lesson about commercialisation and how the industries have evolved. Back there in 250,000 BC we were nomads, so I'm going to go right from the Stone Age through to going onto the farm, through to finding metals and minerals in mining, through to the distribution sector, and then finally industrial and information age. Back then, in 250,000 BC, we were roaming around in tribes, nomadic tribes, hunting, gathering, trapping. Our technology back in those days was, stone, sharp stones for spears and arrows and knives. I guess during that time, about 8,000 to 1700 BC, we moved from being nomads, we moved into agriculture. So we started to become more stationary or static as a society. Instead of travelling around and just hunting things, we stayed put in one place and farmed it. So the first farming, or the agricultural age, began in about 8,000 BC. So we started farming there. The first crop irrigation, instead of just depending on rain, we started to irrigate and dam water in about 5,000 BC. And the technology that changed both agriculture and transport back then was the wheel in 350 BC. Let's keep progressing now. We'll go into the Bronze Age. So now we start to get out of agriculture and start to develop a mining industry, finding metals. So from about 3000 BC to 1200 BC, we're now into the Bronze Age. And I guess the technology that was invented there, as we moved down into the mining, boats came along, or ships, wooden ships, and also chariots came along, which helped the transport centre. So we started to ship things overseas and across water, across land. Now, we discovered back in 1400 BC how to cast metal, so how to melt metals and combine them, particularly copper and tin to make bronze. But bronze was a fairly soft metal. It had some applications in agriculture and military, but it was quite soft. So then we moved into the Iron Age, which we discovered iron ore back there in from 1200 to 500 AD. So we crossed over from BC to AD. And iron was a lot stronger, and you could shape it, and it had military and agricultural applications. What happened in the Iron Age also is we got a bit smarter. We invented, or the alphabet came along back in 1000 BC. Then Arabic numbers came along, and also the calendar. Today's calendar came along about 45 BC. Then that tertiary sector started to evolve, that distribution sector here in the Middle Ages. Here we were growing things in the agricultural world, and here we were mining things and developing metal. When we were producing stuff on the farm, we had a surplus of crops. We got better at producing stuff from the farm, and so we had to ship it around, and so trade started to increase, and hence also transport and distribution increased there. So that's the Middle Ages. The Renaissance age then followed, where the arts were reborn, and that helped the cultural sector, industrial sector. And we also had the printing press come along here, which helped our communications sector. So books were able to be mass produced. And the transport sector was aided also here by the invention of railroads to ship heavy cargo around. Finally then, we got into the industrial age, which is, it started about 1700 in the world, through to 1940, the industrial age. Factories started to appear, and people mass-produced things. So it was a very dirty sort of industry and a dirty age, because it was carbon intensive. And the big piece of technology that helped the industrial age was the steam engine coming along. Now, how was Australia positioned? We discussed this briefly last lecture, but how was Australia positioned when the rest of the world is in the industrial age? We were a penal settlement, so we were a European settlement. We were called New Holland back in those days, changed the name in 1813 to Australia, but we were still convicts. So the rest of the world was in manufacturing. We were there late. Now, don't be too critical of New Zealand, because New Zealand was once our state. It was actually the state of New South Wales. It also included New Zealand too. And they, because they spoke funny, we just chipped them off as a country. That happened in 1940. So they got separated. And most of Australia was New South Wales. As mining got developed down in Victoria, they chipped off a state called Victoria. Same with Queensland, same with the West. So mining really pushed the evolution and development of the states. And the piece of technology that really helped that one, that industrial revolution along, was the telegraph. That assisted long-distance communications. So let's have a look at the way Australia's evolved in the mix of industries. That's a bit hard to read, but let's have a look. Over here, this is by year, and that's 1800, there's 1900, there's 2000. And that's the percentage of GDP that each of those industries, that's 17 of those industries, are along. It's really a mix. Out of 100%, that's personal services, that's about, 15%. That's agriculture, that's about 40-odd% there. So let's have a look at Australia back in 1800. There are less than 10 industries back then in 1800. There was farming, the agricultural sector, that made up a big chunk, about 40%. When we were just settling, government and defence was another big chunk there, that blue chunk there, and the purple one was the prisons and also the religion or the church. So that made up about 15% of what Australia's industries were. So as we evolved, in Australia we discovered gold down in Bendigo and in Ballarat. We discovered different sorts of ores and minerals everywhere. So that led to a mining sector in Australia. See how agriculture, we migrated out of agriculture there and all rushed to the gold fields. That happened around the 1950s, 1960s. So people migrated out of one sector, which is agriculture, into mining. And when you get a mass migration of people, what follows also is a mass unemployment increase, and also usually a depression or an industry downturn as people are migrating out of one industry into the other. And that's indeed what happened. I guess in '51 the gold rush started in Victoria. We found gold and silver and copper in some of the other states, and there was a severe depression as we were racing out of the agricultural sector and trying to race into the mining sector. That's usually what happens. The other pieces of technology that came along that helped communications was the telephone back then, and also international communication via radio. So they got invented then as well. Now let's have a look here. The mining sector lasted for a little bit, but what was the technology in the mining sector like back in those days? The gold rush.
Manual.
Very manual, yeah. They had pans to pan for gold and shovels. That was about it. So what they did was they scratched the surface and discovered gold, but they couldn't go down deep. That age lasted for about 50 years, and then see how we migrated out of there into what's that sector there? Manufacturing, yeah. So we migrated again into manufacturing, and then there was a big depression that occurred as we did the migration. So around the 1900s, there was about 180 industries. So it evolved from about less than 10 industries to about 180 by 1800 in Australia. And again, the rest of the world, when were they in manufacturing? It started about 1700 back here. We got into manufacturing. See how the sector's grown there? We got into it quite late, so we're trailing behind. Now, the other things that occurred, pieces of technology that came along was the airlines, the aeroplanes that enabled long distance or transportation. By the way, Qantas also holds the title of being the world's oldest airline now. Who was it before? KLM, yeah. And why is KLM not the oldest now? It merged with another airline, so it's no longer just a clean airline. Qantas is now the oldest airline in the world. TV also came along in '23, which enabled visual communications, and again, the Great Depression occurred as we moved from that agricultural age, the manufacturing and industrial age into the communications and IT age. Again, a depression occurs. So the information age started really about the 1940s when we were using valve technology in mainframe computers. We then introduced in '48 the transistors to replace the valves. Then in '59 integrated circuits and microchips. The next revolutionary technology that appeared was the cellular phone in '78, and finally in 1984 the internet. So they're the major technologies that occurred during that information age. The people that study these cycles, these industrial cycles, say the information age is declining and we're about to go into this new recreational age, or this new age that's coming through. So it's changing. So again, we got into where's it in Australia? See how we jumped from very small sector here to quite a large sector here? That happened in about the 1980s. So we got in, the world was in the information age about the 1950s. So we got in there about 20, 30 years too late. And again, people are migrating. See how the people migrate from this industrial sector, they migrated into the information age. When I was coming through university and studying as an engineer, I was really worried because I was seeing the industrial age or the manufacturing operations decline, and that's where most of the engineers ended up, as operations managers, and I thought, I'm doing a degree and I'm not going to have a job. But a lot of these industries weren't invented back then. For instance, the internet, 1984, wasn't around, was it? And it's created a massive amount of employment. So the mix or the blend of industries changed as we evolved. So now it's gone from 10 to about 180 to now 464 industries as we've evolved over the last 200 years. This tertiary sector, the green sector, which represents wholesale, retail and transport, has always stayed constant at around 14%. As soon as we were on the farm or mining or in the industry, we always have to get products out to consumers. So that distribution sector stayed fairly constant until about now. It's starting to get squeezed. Why is that? What's happening to retail and wholesale and transport? What? Yeah, the internet, the technology is killing it, isn't it? Or it's migrating and changing. So the retailers are really starting to feel it now. They always predict it's going to happen 10 years before it does, but they're feeling it. What's happening to, say, transport? Australia Post, what's replacing that?
Email.
Not couriers, but isn't it email? Yeah, their letter business and those sort of message communications businesses are rapidly declining and it's becoming electronic. So that constant 14% is becoming smaller and smaller now because of technology. But that's not to say that, I'm just saying here that the mix of industry is changing as we're moving through here. But over that last 100 years, GDP in Australia has increased 32 times. So we've got bigger as an economy. I think we're doing about 1.3 trillion at the moment as an economy. We grow all the time, but the mix is changing. We're moving away from product-based agriculture and mining and industrial sectors through to services. We're mainly services now. So we're changing. So let's have a quick look at industry in Australia. I'll throw up a few statistics here. What's the largest employer? What's the largest number of enterprises, do you think? What has the largest number of businesses? Which sector would you say? Yeah, small business. But what's usually small business there in those 17 sectors there? Which you think would be the largest? Information technology? Yeah, let's have a look. Now, I know you can't read that, so I'm going to take the top ones and blow them up. And property and business services where IT fits in, you're right. That's got lots and lots of little SMEs, lots of consultants and engineers that have got out there and started their own business. So a lot of consultants and engineers are in that sector. Construction's number 2, that's all the tradies. Retailers are number 3. And then the farmers. So if you look at the opportunistic entrepreneurs that we discussed last lecture, that's a big chunk of them there. And that's why we've got so many opportunistic entrepreneurs in Australia. The necessity entrepreneurs are those next 3 sectors. So that's what makes up the number of businesses in Australia. That's why we have got a small business economy. How many less than 20? What was the percentage? Can anybody remember? 99.7. It's just incredible. Yeah. So that's less than 20. Now, the largest number of employees. Where are all the employees? Which sector do you think? Which one uses lots and lots of people? Retail. Absolutely correct. Yeah. So if I take that, there's 1.4 million enterprises employing 9.3 million people. So Australia's got 22 million people, but a lot of them are babies and old bludgers. The rest of them are at work. And let's take that. Retail's number 1, absolutely. The retail sector employs most of the people here, followed by the consultants, the property business service sector. The manufacturers are also big employers. It's usually tailored jobbing shops that we have left in Australia. Most of the volume manufacturing has gone overseas to China or to the lower wage countries. We're holding on to the tailor-made stuff here. So manufacturing is still quite big as an employer. That's why when you hear about the manufacturing sector closing down, governments get very worried because that means a lot of unemployed people that they've got to support. construction's there too. Where do you get the most money if you're going to go out there and work for somebody? What's the largest wage? Oh, absolutely correct. So let's blow that up. The average wage in Australia is 60 grand, 60,200 to be exact. And mining's the biggest. It's weighing in at, I think it was 120 grand on average. Followed by electricity, all the utility companies, then finance and the insurance, and then government. So that's a bit about Australia. So we've learned that we can classify industries, and by the way, that classification is not purely just Australia. It's also done on a worldwide basis. So the same classifications or similar apply to the US as they apply to Canada, as they apply to Hong Kong and Singapore. Now, let's classify products and services. Where did I say you'll probably end up last lecture? In a service or a product industry? Yeah, service. Yeah. In 1850, in the US, 65% of employment occurred in the agricultural sector. But back in those days, the industrial sector was taking off. People were moving out of the farms onto the factories, and they were really worried about this migration. But it happens, and again, we're going to migrate probably, it's not good news for the IT engineers here, move out of the IT sector more into the recreational and the personal services sector over the next 20 or so years. And agriculture used to represent 65% of employment in the US. Now it's less than 2% of employment. So we've moved. Our mix has changed. What they've done on the farms is replace labour with capital machinery and automated it a lot. But we still got people picking things out there on the farms, or do we do it by machinery? Combine harvest, mainly big machines. Sorry?
Machinery, but possible.
Yeah, where possible. And we're technology leaders in agriculture for developing new machines. Our services sector in the developed world is about 60 to 70% of that mix. If you look at the states, what I'm doing is plotting here 3 lines. I've got services. It's gone from, 30% in 1900 up to 80%. Manufacturing has gone down to about, 15%. Agriculture is down to about 2 or 3%. It used to be, what was it here? About 40-something%. It's now about 2 for employment. If you think this is biased towards the States, there's the UK. It's even worse. Yeah. If you think this is biased towards Europe, there's Japan. Japan's still holding a manufacturing sector. It hasn't got any land, so it's got no agriculture virtually whatsoever, and its services sector is up around 70-odd%. There's Germany. It's holding on to manufacturing, but even its services sector is above 60%. So that's probably where you're going to end up. There was Australia before, back in the 1800s. 60% of that was basically products. Today, 70% is now services. See, the products have shrunk to that, and it's now services. So we're basically working in a services economy. And the dominant force in the services economy are you, the people with the brains or the skills. Knowledge is what drives this service economy. That's good news. In the old economy, human capital was replaced by physical capital, such as in the farms. They take out the pickers who were picking in the orchards and put in a machine. And manufacturers were pretty ugly towards their employees. They just treated them as costs. And their production model was to strip as much labour out of their business as possible to reduce the cost. Do services companies think about people as costs? Do they? If they're employing you as engineers to go and project manage something or deliver a job, services companies think of you as revenue producers, or you're interfacing with a customer. So they've got a different attitude towards labour than manufacturers have. We had a lot of union problems and industrial problems back 30 years ago, when that manufacturing and industrial sector was alive and well, because all management did was think about labour as costs, and it was pretty antagonistic too. Whereas now that we've moved into a services economy, you don't hear about a lot of industrial action or strikes as much anymore. If you went through the 60s and 70s, they were striking every day. Now, we're treating our people a lot fairer, and we're treating you as, hey, you're producing revenue. You're not a cost to us. You're a revenue producer. So it's a lot better way that management and labour are working together. Let's have a look at Australia. This is back a few years old, 2007. Agriculture now represents 3% of our economy, manufacturing 26%, and services 71%. Singapore pretty much the same. UK the same. US even worse, or even higher in services. Yeah. Have a look at China. What's China doing? Which age is China still in? China's evolving. China started later than the rest of the world, and it's getting out of the farms but into manufacturing. So it's going through its industrial age. It's still in the industrial manufacturing age. It will keep evolving and evolve to that business model there for services eventually. What's happening to India? What's it doing? It's skipping the industrial age altogether. Yeah, they obviously made a few things they broke, so they decided we're not very good at this. Let's just, I mean, you go to India and have a look at their wide telecommunications network. They bypassed it. What do they put into India now? Yeah, they went straight to cellular and straight to wireless because they don't have a good infrastructure here back in the industrial and manufacturing age. So they're kind of jumping off the farm and skipping an age. Now, if you look at the developed world, most of the economies are only growing at about 2% GDP per annum. And if it's knowledge-based and service-based, why are the economies only growing at 2% per annum, you think? What would be the reason? Sorry?
Population growth.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're limited by population growth. If you look at GDP growth for each of these economies, which is here, it's only about 2%. Services depends on people and your brains and knowledge, and if the population growth is limited to about 2%, and so is the GDP in the developed world. Okay. Have a look at China and India. Can you see how their growth rates are a lot higher? They're not as restricted to the number of people, and what they're doing is they're pulling a lot of people off the farms, particularly in India, and putting them straight into the services sector. So that's why their growth rates are a lot higher than the rest of the developed world, because they're migrating through different industrial ages. Now, when you look at services, the service-based economy is kind of split. It's bipolar, if you like. You've got the highest paying jobs, which is your doctors and your lawyers and your engineers as well. Really highly paid jobs that require university degrees, and then you've got the really lowly paid jobs in the hospitality sector and garbage collection and those sort of things. So the services sector is kind of split into the highest wages and the lowest wages. And all but one of the 50 highest paying jobs now in the economy is in the service sector. And the 50 highest paying jobs are in the service sector. Only one of them does not require a university degree. Does anybody know what that is? Sorry? It's air traffic controller. That's the only one that doesn't require a university degree, but the rest of them do. I guess all of the low-paying jobs seem to have gone to China, which is the world's manufacturing facility in India, which is the world's office now. Any country in the developed world that speaks English is in danger of being outsourced to India. If you're in Italy, you haven't got too many problems because India hasn't learned to speak Italian yet. Now, when we look at products and services, it's not clean, it's not black and white. Salt is definitely a tangible product, but as you go through this scale, seafood here is sort of half fast food, is half a product, which is tangible, and also half an intangible service. What's the product which is the tangible for in McDonald's, for instance? The actual food itself. What's the service? The cooking it. The fact that you can get it delivered. Yeah. So can you see how it's not clean? It gets more and more towards intangible services the further down you go to panel beating and airlines and financial planning, etc. So it's sort of a gradient, if you like, between products and services. So here's our first case study for today. It's a case study about IBM. And IBM is a company. When did IBM start? About what sort of year? 1800s? Yeah, just near the turn of the century, right at the end of the 1800s. So they've gone through producing products which were computers, mainframe computers, the operating system, right through to services now. So this is quite a good case study. Now IBM, IBM traditionally made proprietary mainframe hardware. They were a vertically integrated company that made everything. What percentage of the computer industry do you think IBM has now? Any sort of idea of the share?
Very little.
Very little?
They sold most of it off.
Sorry?
They sold most of it off.
They sold most of it off?
Like
Yeah.
physical.
Yeah. How much do you reckon, back in 75, did IBM have of the computer industry? What sort of chunk, what sort of share? About 90%, yeah? Microsoft wasn't even around. Yeah. Intel was not around. Yeah. IBM dominated. They used to call it IBM and the Seven Dwarfs. The Seven Dwarfs were Univac and all these other, Honeywell, these names you don't even know now. So all the names you know in the computer industry weren't even around then. IBM totally dominated, or totally wiped the market. Now, what caught them by surprise was the world's first computer, or personal computer, called the Altium 8800. That's the world's first PC. It was a complete surprise to them. It was a substitute or leapfrog technology that they weren't ready for. What were they producing back then, 75? Mainframes, great big, they looked like wardrobes, but inside they had some lights. Yeah. So big blue boxes we used to call them. We used to call them farms of blue boxes. That's what they were producing. Now, IT people were hated back in those days. I know, I was one of the haters of these IT people. Whenever you had some an IT department in a company, managers in marketing or human resources wanted to get a report out or wanted to get something changed in their report, it would take months. It would go into the IT department, they put it in a priority list and work out how long it's going to take to go and change things, change a report. It would take months, so that the IT people kind of had the company by the short and curlies. And it wasn't until the PC came along that it put power back to the middle managers, away from that computer department. And it wasn't the PC that did it, it was that did it. What's that? A spreadsheet. That's the world's first spreadsheet, VisiCalc. Excel wasn't around in those days. VisiCalc then migrated to Lotus 123. They became the major player, Lotus 123. VisiCalc was before it, and it was a killer app that transferred power inside that PC to middle managers, and that's what really took IBM by surprise. IBM sold mainframes to these IT departments and wasn't paying attention to how quickly people were picking up these PCs. They thought they were toys. Anyway, technology really advanced quite rapidly with the introduction of the PCs. IBM responded late and got into the PC market in '81. It went over to Seattle and got the operating system off Bill Gates. It was Gates bought it. It was called QDOS, which was stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System. He then changed the name to MS-DOS and cleaned it up, and then sold it to IBM or licensed it to IBM. Also, IBM would normally have built the whole thing: the operating system, the box, the integrated circuit, the memory, etc. They didn't have time. They had to get in late, so they got the processor, CPU from Intel. And by doing that, it broke their domination of the computer industry. All of a sudden, Microsoft owned the operating system, Intel owned the microprocessor, HP came in with the printers, Novell with the networking, Seagate with the disk drives, and Oracle with the databases. And so you had lots of different innovation happening in different silos, and the PC industry rapidly evolved. How did IBM respond? They split their company up into certain domains, specific domains, to try to compete. And they didn't do a bad job. They built their PC market to 50% share, which is the dominant player in the PC market. But what had happened was they used to produce these mainframes, and the quick uptake of PCs wasn't quick enough for their decline in the mainframe. So that's where that was going down in their revenue, that was going up in the revenue, but that was going down a lot quicker. It resulted in them losing $1 billion, and then followed by another $5 billion loss. That was the world's biggest loss. I mean, it looks small now, but that was the world's biggest loss back in 1992. So they started to transition away from products and started to move towards services. The first step was to move more out of hardware into software. And they bought a lot of different companies. They launched DB2, their database product, Lotus Notes, WebSphere, and they've got IBM Tivoli and a few others, IBM Rational Rose. They had about 31,000 patents on their software. Has anybody heard of these systems? Which one's still around?
Lotus.
Notes is still around. Has it got any faster? I got about. It's still horrible, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, excellent.
Too bad.
But anything else that's still around here? Is DB2 around, is it? Yeah. Is that a significant competitor to Oracle?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, so they made a few right decisions. So they're moving out of hardware into software. The problem was they had their Domino web server up against Apache, which had 50% of the world's market. They had about 1%. Has anybody heard of the OS2 operating system? Yeah. Yeah, it was there for a while, but against Windows, it was a fraction of the market. You know? And so what happened was Sun and Microsoft held the volume and the high end of the market. Dell held the cheapest and cheerful end of the market down here. IBM was sandwiched in the middle. And when you get sandwiched in the middle, you're either that one or that one, you lose a lot of money. And that's what happened. They were losing rafts of money. So how did IBM then respond? If they're sort of stuck here in the middle, how would you respond? Does anybody know what they did? Who's heard of open source software? Yeah, the open source world? Yeah. What happened was IBM really was losing out in their software, in their web servers, in their database programs, in their operating systems. So they befriended Linux, which was an open source free operating system. That allowed them to undercut Microsoft and Sun because it was free. Linux loved it because it was really the domain of hackers and these open source people in the community that used it. IBM partnering up with Linux made it a business or a commercial type of operating system, and it took the risk away from businesses migrating to it. So it was a win-win for both companies, or for both the operating system and also for IBM. IBM then transferred to getting more money out of services than they did out of hardware. They started to decline in their hardware business and products and move into services. And they didn't have to spend $1 billion a year on developing their operating system. That was done in the open source community. They had to change their culture and style, had to speed up. They couldn't spend months in planning and designing and developing software. They had to just get it out and test it very quickly. Now, the first phase of the open source market was to put out its LAMP stack called the operating system, which was Linux, the web server, MySQL for the database, and PHP for the programming language. Now, that's worked for a while, but if the open source community is going to take on the likes of Microsoft and these big corporations, the next phase is to develop enterprise software applications. For instance, put all that together and develop a Word application or an accounting system or a customer relationship management system. So that's what's happening in the open source community now. They're going into the second phase and they're releasing it through the cloud, or they're jumping technology and releasing it through the cloud computing architecture. That's kind of good for IBM because 70% of the cost structure of a IT company is in the sales and marketing effort. How do you get open source software? Does a salesperson come and sell it to you? You download it, don't you? You go and download it for free and try it out. So it's kind of good for IBM because they got rid of a lot of their costs. Then finally they finished their migration into services, so totally away from products into services. In 2002 they bought the consulting division of PricewaterhouseCoopers set up IBM Global Services. They were useless at making products, their PC business, so they got out of that. They were losing about 750 million back then in their PC business. They got out of products and signed up with Lenovo. They took about almost a 20% stake of Lenovo, who was the largest Chinese manufacturer of PCs. So they still hold that stake in their business and passed the product over to them. So they really became a service provider. So they're transitioning from product through to software and now to services. They're still alive. They're turning over 100 billion today, 19 billion in profit. And because they're services, see how many employees they've got? It's all people-based for IBM. So it's a good example of a company that's transitioned right through the product and service spectrum. Okay. So let's have a look at how to classify products. There are really two major classifications. One's consumer products and the other one's business products. Business transactions, they buy another product of another company, add value to it and then resell it, transform it. So let's have a look at how we classify consumer products. One way of doing these classifications is the amount of shopping effort that you spend on buying a product. That's usually how to classify consumer product. What's a typical convenience product? You're not going to spend much shopping effort at all, probably a nanosecond. What would be a convenience product? Milk's one. Yep.
Bottled water.
Bottled water, absolutely. Yeah. Anything else? Who buys bottled water? Anybody admit to buying bottled water? Yeah, that is marketing's biggest con ever, bottled water. In fact, a friend of mine runs a orange juice company, and he has bottled water to fill up his fridges that he's got out, his impulse fridges that he's got out of the 7-Eleven stores. He was thinking of putting a label on his bottled water, tap water, yeah, and putting that into a bottle. Anyway, yeah, convenience products are inexpensive. For instance, like lollies, chocolates, cans of soft drink. Anything you go to a 7-Eleven store for, a convenience store, that's a convenience or an impulse product. Where do these live in a convenience store? In the fridge. Those refrigerators are called impulse refrigerators because you never buy these products unless you see them at the checkout or near where the person is standing. New idea in those convenience sort of magazines, where do they live? In, say, Coles or Woolies?
Checkout.
Right at the checkout, yeah. That's where most of the impulse products live. They try to get them right near the checkout so that you look at it, it's an impulse buy, you reach over and you put it into the shopping cart. Also, the lollies usually live lower down. Why? For the kids, absolutely. Yeah. Shopping products are a little bit, it takes a bit more time to go and find a shopping product. You probably might visit 2 or 3 different stores. A typical shopping product would be electrical goods. You might shop around maybe a day or 2 or go and visit a couple of stores. Furniture would be a shopping product. You might go to Freedom and Oz Design or something like that, and clothes too. That's another typical shopping product. So you'd look at several different brands and compare them, but there's not a lot of effort that you spend on getting a shopping product. Next type of products are specialty products. These products have very strong brands, and you might spend quite a bit of effort to look for one of these specialty products, or you might have done a bit of research with your peer group and found out what the best thing is to buy. So a typical specialty product would be a wristwatch like a Rolex, perfumes, especially products or luxury goods, and cars too. Cars you'd spend quite a bit of time doing research and purchasing. So that's what we call specialty products. An unsought product is stuff that you don't look for. And retailers don't need a lot of person selling to sell those other products, but you need to personally sell these. You need to have a face-to-face interaction or sell it over the telephone. Typical unsought products, things that we don't seek, are insurance, like car insurance or business insurance or life insurance, and anything to do with debt. We're not actively seeking that. So you need to, I've noticed on television just lately, have you noticed all the death ads that are coming on TV? About funerals, and that's all the baby boomers coming through. It's springing coming through and dropping off. Yeah, it's springing up a new industry in debt. So that's the way we classify consumer products. Business products, a way to classify them is this. There's about 6 different categories of these products. Major equipment are plant and machinery in buildings like this. This would be major equipment. For instance, big machinery on a production line. You need to have personal selling to sell these. So why we're classifying these is that when we're doing our business plan, if you go through a decision tree and work out what sort of product you got, it sets up how to market it, how to advertise it, how to distribute it, how to sell it. So it works out all of that for you in a decision tree. Computers would be another major piece of equipment, and buildings generally would be major. And you need a lot of selling, personal selling. Accessory equipment, like the tools that are used on a manufacturing line to make stuff. So, you know, drill bits and grinders and spray painters and these sort of accessories. It doesn't need a lot of personal selling. You just use industrial distributors or wholesalers to get them out into the marketplace. Component parts are components that live inside a bigger product. For instance, what's a component part of a PC? The processor, yeah. So what happens is you use personal selling to sell these component parts because you're selling large volumes. Say if you do a deal with Dell, Intel will sell large volumes of their processors to Dell. So you usually use the personal selling to sell it to the original equipment manufacturer, and the replacement market's addressed by industrial parts distributors. For instance, in a car, that would be an accessory item: the battery, the tyres, the fan belts. You use personal selling to sell them to, say, Ford or General Motors or BMW. And then the aftermarket, where they need the parts, that's all done through parts distributors or industrial distributors. So the challenge for you, I guess, is to classify whether you've got a product or service. Once you classify them, then all the rules of marketing are fairly set for you. Raw materials, this is from the agricultural age, if you like. For instance, coal and minerals from the ground, wood, rice and all the grain products, fish from the sea. That's again done by personal selling, and you put them out through the distribution channel, through the wholesalers and retailers. Processed materials, mainly for the construction industry, for instance, like Rio bar. You take the raw materials, which is iron ore, and turn it into steel bar, or steel sheets, or chemicals. You take raw materials and turn them into processed chemicals. They're usually made to specific industry standards or specifications from the customer, and you go through a tendering process, so again you need to use personal selling there. And finally, supplies, MRO they call it, maintenance, repair and operating supplies. This is the last sort of industrial product. For instance, like detergents and lubricants and oils and paper, those sundry supply items may be done through industrial distributors. So don't worry about how to sell or advertise or any of that yet. We're going to come back and do that later in the course. Just note that business products are classified into different things, and it just helps you work out your marketing plan later when you do your business plan. Okay, that's classification of products. Now let's see how we classify services. Services, there's about 100 ways of classifying services, so I just use the chart. You saw those 17 different industries to classify the services. You can classify them on whether they're intangible or more tangible, whether the customer's involved or not involved, whether they're perishable. There's hundreds of ways of classifying services, so I just use the industrial standard classification codes. Now let's have a look at these services and why they're a bit more difficult, because they're intangible. You walk out of a movie, you've seen a movie, 10 people walking out of the movie, they don't all have the same opinion, don't they? You might have 10 different opinions about a movie. It's because it's subjectively assessed. Products, you can objectively assess whether they're going to work or not, whether they're functional or not. But unfortunately, services are very subjective in their assessment because they're intangible. A mobile phone. That's the actual mobile phone itself. You can assess how light it is. You can assess how many functions there are on it, what the appearance looks like. That's a product that's easily and objectively assessed. What's more subjective though, would you say? The service, yeah, the network coverage. You ask other people, we live up in the Blue Mountains, what's the service like? Does it drop out a lot? So that's far more subjective, that network coverage, than the actual product itself. And that's what's difficult about services. If you go into these large consulting firms downtown like PwC or McKinsey's or KPMG, you're going to see a massive reception area. It's going to be very, polished stone. It's going to look impressive. Why is that? You go to a big legal firm like, first impressions count. What they're trying to do is attach a tangible image to what the service is going to be like they're going to deliver. What's behind the reception area? What's in the back room when you go into the back room? Sorry? Lots of offices and cubicles. Same as a small business. They're exactly the same people as a small business. It's just that these are much bigger players, so they try to attach a tangible appearance to what they're doing. Let's have a look at supply and demand. For products, it's easy. Remember I said the product business usually passes their products onto that distributor, the distributor industry, to get the goods out to the customer. It's easy because you produce the product, you might do it in China or somewhere, then you sell it separately, you pass it on to the wholesaler and retailer, and that's sold, and then that's passed to the consumer. So the functions of producing it and distribution are separated. So you can have a distribution structure in the middle. Also, you've got inventory. You can store the goods, so you can balance supply and demand out with inventory. Services are harder. Services, a lot of the time, you sell them, produce them, and consume them at the same time. So it's much. Can you store a service? It's more difficult, isn't it? Yeah, like an airline seat, Qantas, when it takes off. If the seat's empty, how do you fill it? You need a bloody long ladder, don't you, to fill that seat. Once the airline's taken off, it's taken off. So you can't really store a service. It's very difficult to store, and it's quite unusual to resell services. Just like that, you've got a product and you can put it through a retailer and wholesaler. It's quite unusual to take a service and put it through a wholesaler and retailer. There are some industries that they do it, but it's more difficult. Also, supply and demand's a problem with services because if you've hired a team to go and deliver a service and more customers show up, then you get queues. For instance, taxis. Who gets a taxi on New Year's Eve? Can you get one? 4 in the morning? Hard to do, isn't it? Yeah? Because they've only got a limited number of taxis, a limited number of supply. If the demand peaks, same with electricity, you can't store it, so they've got to balance their supply and demand very carefully to account for the peak loads for air conditioners, etc., and then tone it down at night. Disneyland. What's the problem with Disneyland? Who's been? Long queues. Yeah. I remember queuing for the Indiana Jones ride. And I looked at they've got markers along the way, and they said you're an hour 45 minutes for the ride at this point. And I looked at it, I thought, no, there's no way, it's a joke. But we were an hour and 45 minutes to that ride. That's the problem with Disneyland. So you've got to really manage those queues and manage the waiting times. Some ways of doing it is in the airline business, they've got reservation systems, same with hotels, restaurants and cars. They've spread or managed the customers by using these reservation systems. If all the customers turn up and the service isn't available, and they get satisfied. The other way they're doing it is, for instance, in the airport, they put in these frequent flyer lounges to manage you in that waiting process. What happens in the frequent flyer lounge? Yeah, you get tagged, and so you're so whacked or you're so drunk you don't notice the waiting time. Flies. And same with golf courses. They put in a putting green so you can practice on the putting green while you're waiting to tee off. Restaurants, not so much here, but in the US, they always get you to go to the bar and sit at the bar and have a few drinks before they get you into the restaurant. So that's another way of managing the waiting time. And if you've staffed up to deliver a certain volume of supply, it's hard in the service business because in the downtime you've still got to pay for the staff. So golf courses market to the retirees and the senior citizens at lunchtime when all the business people are off the golf course. They try to keep the golf course booked with other people in the off-peak time. Same within the Blue Mountains hotels. The peak time is over Christmas and the summer period. So they're now marketing Christmas in July. They've been doing that for the last 20 years or so to build the off-season or the winter off-season up there. So it's kind of difficult to manage supply and demand if you're delivering a service. Another way to do it is to bring in a lot of part-timers, and pubs do that. They have a happy hour because they've got to bring in part-timers. I think the minimum's about, is it 4 hours? Who's worked in the bar? 3 hours, is it? Yeah. And so they put in happy hour because they've got you there for the minimum. They put in happy hour to get more customers in on let's say the 4 o'clock and the 5 o'clock time period, so that it pays to get the staff in at the same time and pay for 3 or 4 hours. So it's very difficult. The other way to manage it is to get customers to do it themselves. Restaurants, there's a buffet service, so self-service. Petrol stations. When I was going to university, there were no self-service petrol stations. It was all full service. You go and you wouldn't get out of your car. There was a driveway attendant that would attend to you. So self-service is quite a new thing for the industry. Banks, ATMs. This is quite new, self-service, and supermarkets. Again, when I was coming through or growing up. I remember the first self-service supermarket come to Australia, which was Safeways in Camberwell. There wasn't self-service; it was always service, full service, and people would walk up and down the aisles in supermarkets. You couldn't just pick things off the shelf; they would serve you, and you'd buy it from somebody walking up and down the aisles. So these are relatively new innovations in the service industry.
How far back did self-service go in supermarkets?
Back to about the 50s, yeah, 50s and 60s. So these are all fairly new innovations. Yeah? I mean, biscuits. How do you buy biscuits these days? Yeah, Woolies or Coles, and how do you actually get them? Pre-packet, yeah. When I was growing up, you got them out of tins. They were individually placed into tins, and they open up a metal tin and reach in and pull out 5 biscuits and then serve you. That's how you bought them in those days. So supply and demand is difficult for the service business. Also, customers are involved, and that's probably one of the most difficult for the service business. This service business, we have to manage you, you're the customer in the education business. So I guess manufacturers don't have to worry about interacting with customers. They just pass it on to the retailer and the wholesaler, and they have the problem of managing the customers. Service providers have to have a different skill set to go and manage the customers. They've got to have a quality of interaction. It's no use being technically brilliant like House and being able to cut you up, no problem. You've also got to smile while you're doing it. So you've got to have a different skill set for being able to interact with customers. Customers are involved to sometimes start the service, such as delivering a car to be worked on in the workshop, or delivering your clothes to get them dry cleaned. So customers are involved to physically either start the service, or they might be involved in the whole service. For instance, if you've got a dental appointment, you've got to go and sit in the dentist chair while your tooth's being done, or a medical operation. So we've got to put together facilities that accommodate that and make it look good. That's why UTS is spending such a lot on upgrading all their facilities, so that you have a better time as a student as we're providing the service to you. So, if you've noticed, we've been doing a lot to try to upgrade the facilities. It's a 5-year program. The other problem with customers being involved is if you shop at a dentist, do customers all have the same problem at the dentist? One person may just want their teeth cleaned, the other person may have a crown. What takes longer? the crowd. It could take an hour. And that throws the production line out of all the customers that are waiting. It just totally throws it out. You never know what happens until the mouth's open and then you have a look in. Also, customers are notoriously difficult or bad at explaining or diagnosing what the problem is. So it takes a bit of time to process customers through a service operation. That leads to a lot of waiting time. And whereas manufacturers don't worry, they've got fixed production schedules, the service production schedules are all over the place. Another way of managing this is to, again, isolate the things that you can automate. And that's what banks did. How did banks do it before the ATM? All tellers, yeah? Now, who's been to a bank lately? Does anybody actually use a bank teller these days? A few people. I must confess I did the other day, but mainly they get you to use that. So automating is a way of doing it. Who's had one of these chatbots talk to you over the internet? Yeah? NAB or Westpac or Telstra? Yeah. eBay are doing, what, 200,000 customer conversations through these chatbots now. Again, a way of trying to automate their service. And now the banks are starting to do it too. Having, instead of a person talking to you, an automated person talking to you. So what industries, the service industries, are in danger of being automated? These processing type of industries, and education's there too. Publishing, that's in free fall at the moment. Which corporation is in free fall at the moment in publishing? All the booksellers and also the newspapers too. Yeah, they're all in free fall as well. And education is going to move very much online and be automated. The ones that will stay around, thankfully, are probably engineers because we employ engineers for their skills and what's in your brain, and that's kind of difficult to automate. You can use artificial intelligence and decision theory, but it's not really going to replace you. Also, if you're working where there's high customer involvement, such as in nursing, dentists and medicals, restaurants and hotels, they're going to be very difficult to automate too. So some of the other things like education will go quite quickly. You're right. So lastly, and then we'll have a break. Last slide. Services are ultimately perishable. If you've got an airline, you can't sell any more seats once the plane's taken off. If you've got a theatre production, you can't sell any more seats after the performance has started. So that's why it's so difficult to manage supply and demand, because it's ultimately a perishable good. All right, let's have a break for about 10 minutes. 15 minutes.
20 minutes. 5 hours.
When we come back, turn your PCs on.